Welcome to She Sells Radio. So today we are digging deeper into our series on prosperity laws. And we're talking today specifically about how to navigate what feels like a financial wilderness. And this has been my experience in my own life is, we have these periods that it can feel like everything is just flowing and you're feeling like super abundant and you're dazzled and delighted with how much is coming to you and you don't really need to think about money at all. Like everyone has their own journey, right? So if you're listening to that and you're like, at least I've never had that situation, just take whatever your version of that is, where you felt like relaxed, calm, etc. about money. And then things can happen where suddenly you feel like the faucet turns off, or you feel like everything that was working no longer is. And you find yourself in this place that feels like this financial wilderness. And you're like, WTF, God, what's going on? What's up with this? And so I want to speak to that today. And again, I'm basing at least the first part of this series on a book by Catherine Ponder called The Millionaire Moses. So just know a lot of the teachings and stories in here come from biblical teachings, specifically Old Testament. I personally am so open to all spiritual teachings. Just say like take what works for you from this. This is really just the foundation of what what we're building on in this series, because there's so much richness and so much good here to help teach you about creating true prosperity in your life. And I think that's something I think I mentioned this on the first episode, but if you haven't yet, like really define what true prosperity looks like for you, because it's different for everyone. And it's not just money. I think that's the thing. To me, at this point in my life, of course, I love and appreciate and enjoy living in financial abundance. And it's also, to me, it's more about like a feeling and a feeling of connection, specifically spiritual connection, that guides me and helps me no matter what the outer circumstances are. Because sometimes we find ourselves in this place that feels like financial wilderness, and we're kind of like, what happened? Like, what changed, or why am I here? And so I want to read to you this passage from her book. Let's see here, called The Purpose of a Financial Wilderness. And then I'll share kind of my takeaways here as well. So she's talking about when the Hebrews escaped Egypt and they spent 40 years in the wilderness. And if you know the story at all, you know that it was like day by day they gathered manna from heaven and they had to rely on it day by day. They didn't have this overabundance of supply that they felt like they could just rely on all the time. So it was literally a daily scenario of gathering their resources and relying on God to provide that. So the author says, in the wilderness, they were given a chance to prove whether they were willing to now look to God as the source of their supply. They were given an opportunity to prove whether they were willing to give up their old methods of working night and day at the hands of cruel taskmasters for an assured but tiny pittance. Pittance, always a funny word. They were given an opportunity to go from the outer hard work level of prosperity to the inner mentally creative level of prosperity. In their wilderness experiences, the Hebrews were learning to release old ways of living and old methods of work. They were being shown new ways of producing prosperity from within out. After they had fully proved their willingness to depend upon God as the source of their supply one day at a time, after they had proved that the substance he provided them on the sixth day was also sufficient to carry them through the seventh day, or a non-productive period, because manna wasn't provided on the seventh day, it was a day of rest, then they were freed from their wilderness wanderings, and it's one day at a time financial existence. So much goodness in here. And, I forget where I heard this, but I heard this earlier this year, and this spoke so powerfully to me. Gosh, I wish I could remember it as I say it, that it is a part of every soul's journey that at some point you're going to have to learn how to look for the real source of your supply and not rely on external circumstances. And that it's not a matter of if it's going to be part of your journey, it's a matter of when. And so I remember when I heard that, I was going through something that felt like that. And I don't want to get into a lot of details here because the details don't matter. But a lot of things shifted really quickly over a period of time in my life. And suddenly everything I thought was not. And it felt like whiplash. I've spoken about this a little bit on the show before. And I got to learn the lesson. And I'll tell you what, it doesn't make it easy in the moment. I was speaking with somebody else yesterday who's, high level, like multi-seven figure entrepreneur. And this person is like going through the same thing right now. So it doesn't even matter like what you've built or what you're used to making financially. We all get to go through some sort of an experience like this at some point in our lives. But my takeaway from it was if you can get the lesson, which is you're being invited to a deeper level of understanding and trusting whatever your spiritual connection is to provide. Because even during that time that felt hard for me, we were provided for, like we were cared for day by day. And sometimes it is a day by day type of experience where you get to trust and you get to live in the present moment, and you get to recognize that even if things feel very uncertain and things feel very up in the air and you don't feel like you really know what you're going to do tomorrow, even, you're still somehow always provided for. And so if you are listening to this and this is resonating and you're like, okay, I get it. I feel like I'm in the wilderness and I understand now what that is. Remember, something that feels like a challenge always precedes a great deal of growth. So the only way we get the growth is by going through something that feels like a challenge. So when you're in that, you get to, whatever relief it provides, you get to know that there's a great deal of growth that is literally right on the other side of this for you. And it's growth in all areas, financially, mentally, spiritually. And one of the greatest lessons that I've had from going through this own experience in my life was the lesson of non-attachment and not putting your value or your worth in the money in your bank account, in the numbers in your programs, whatever the thing is that your ego wants to be really attached to. And the other lesson that I got from this is that before a true level of abundance, like before a really expansive level of abundance comes into your life, if it's going to be sustainable, if it's going to be something that you're able to grow and multiply, we have to be somewhat non-attached from it. It's kind of like, and I'm not a biblical scholar, so this is going to be a rough approximation of the story. So you can write me and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is my understanding of it and what I'm remembering from reading this book. That because the Hebrews were about to enter into the promised land, which was overflowing with abundance, but they wouldn't have been able to handle it at their present level of consciousness. So before they could enter in there and have a maturity with it, they had to be refined to learn to look to God as the source of their supply. And so if that's happening in your life, and maybe you're listening to this and you've gone through this and you understand, and if you can, I want you to send me a DM on social. I'm at Elyse Archer. I want to hear about your own experience with this, of navigating your own wilderness. But the wilderness precedes the blessing. The wilderness precedes the abundance. So, but we've got to have a level of maturity around it and a level of conscious connection to what our true source is, that is the provision. So I don't know that this one is a prosperity law per se, but it's a prosperity mindset that will help you whenever it's time to navigate this wilderness. And to know that even in the midst of what feels like a wilderness, you are being provided for. And you're not going to be left high and dry. You're not going to be left out. You're not going to be left to suffer unless you self-impose your own suffering by making it mean something that it doesn't. You're going to be provided for and cared for all along the way. And your only job is to keep looking to your spiritual connection. What would you have me do? What's the next step? How can I provide for today? Okay. And as much as you can through that process, give, right? What can I give? How can I help? How can I serve? It's one of the fastest ways to kick you out of any sort of scarcity feelings or thinkings into a truly abundant state. And from that place, you attract the abundance that you need into your life. So I want to hear from you. Like I said, I'm at Elyse Archer on all social. What spoke to you about this? What questions do you have? Take a screenshot, tag me. I'm always super grateful to hear from you and for you to share the word about this podcast as well. As always, you can check out ElyseArcher.com for our free resources and our programs to help you scale to 6, multi-6, and 7 figures in income and earnings, and step into your next level of financial abundance. Grateful for you. I hope you're enjoying this series, and I'll see you on our next episode of She Sells Radio.